Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing. I hope you all are doing well. So today's question, that which I have opened up for discussion yesterday, is on disaster management. As in, the question is the following: in India, there appears to be more of a disaster of management than the management of a disaster. So what this question is essentially trying to tell us, that we are not able to manage our disasters well, right? So whatever kind of management we do, in fact, that is working backwards, that is basically setting the clock back in terms of management of disasters. We are basically not taking enough steps to handle the disasters, so the management we do can itself be called as a disaster, is what this question has said. So what are the kinds of introductions, conclusions we can think about? What kind of body can we think about for this particular question? I want you to remember that this is a single themed question. It is a 10 marker. So at the minimum you must have 2 side headings. At the maximum you can have 3 side headings in addition to a diagram. See, whenever you write an answer, your answer writing has to be quite methodic and meticulous. So whenever you look at the question, you have to immediately decide the kind of side headings you have, the kind of diagram, if any, you want to put, what kind of facts you would like to put. So all these things have to be clear cut in your mind before you start your answer. Otherwise, what happens is, moving forward halfway into the answer, you will realize that you could have started the answer better. You will realize that you have forgotten some points and you can't add those points now. So all these problems will be there if you don't have that kind of methodic approach to answer writing. This is why we focus more on segregating the question, and once you segregate the question, compartmentalize the question, you think about each side heading and then decide on the kind of points you evolve. So let's move forward. Let's think about the introduction, body and conclusion format for this particular question. Right. So what is the kind of introduction you can have? So you could start this particular answer by starting out and defining what disaster management is. What disaster management is for you, what disaster management is in lucid language, that is how you could talk about it. In addition to this, you could also talk about certain facts. Like for example, India is quite a disaster prone region. In fact, a good amount of the country is flood prone, it is tsunami prone, it is prone to droughts, right? So a lot of disasters are possible in the country, especially because of the geographic location. Like for example, the coastline is quite high, as in the coastline is huge. This coastline, if it is huge, it is going to create a situation of cyclones, tsunamis and so on, right? And in addition to this, we are a tropical country, so there is a possibility of a drought if there are rain shadow regions. So there are quite a good number of rain shadow regions. We also have a desert, and because we are located in the Indian Ocean and there are impacts of El Nino and La Nina on our particular country, so there is a situation of droughts sometimes, there is a situation of floods sometimes. So India is basically quite a disaster prone country. That is what I'm trying to establish here, and this is something you could also establish for the examiner at the outset. So you could talk about the definition of disaster management, or you could talk about facts-based approach, in which you talk about how different parts of India are prone to a lot of disasters. So these are the 2 ways in which you can introduce your answer. Now moving forward, you have to agree with the question, because the question is trying to tell you that the kind of management we do is itself a disaster. You can't outrightly refute this particular point, because he's telling you the truth. The way we manage our disasters is not so well. Like for example, in relation to cyclones and so on, we've been recently developing enough architecture and enough sensibility to evacuate people on time and so on, but in relation to a lot of other disasters, people are not so well versed. The bureaucracy and the local leaders, they do not manage the situation well. Take the example of Vizag gas leak. The Vizag gas leak could have been handled better, and because of COVID-19 lockdown, they should have taken immediate steps in such a situation. Whatever industrial management rules and guidelines are there, they should have been properly followed. So these kind of steps should be taken in order to handle the situation better, but these steps were not taken, so the management of disaster became quite difficult. So you have to establish these things in the answer. So the answer is telling you that there is a disaster of management. So we've agreed that you will establish this, you will say argue in favor of this particular point. So talk about how India has not been able to manage some of its disasters. Talk about how India has not been able to manage the flood situation. Like for example, if you have a flood situation, you are supposed to create storage structures and control the water flow on one hand, and secondly, once you create the storage structures, you should decide when to let go of the gates, when to open the gates, when to close the gates, so that the water flow is properly managed, so that the water does not create a situation of flood and so on. But we are not doing this. That is one problem. And secondly, take the disasters of railway tracks, right? So a lot of railway disasters have happened in 2017 and 18. That is mainly because of improper management of tracks, right? So our preparedness was not good enough, and even after the situation got out of hand, as in even after the disaster took place, the kind of management people have done was not proper. Like for example, if it is an interstate train, which most trains are, so who was supposed to take responsibility for this particular disaster? So the local governments did not want to take it because they didn't want to take the responsibility, because they did not want to be defamed. Neither did the people outside across the border want to do it. So in such a situation, there should be a proper chain of accountability. There should be a proper chain of responsibility as to who has to handle the situation better, who has to handle the situation in such a way that the life loss is minimized. So these things have to be done, and these things have not been done. So in India, we see a situation of disaster of management. Having said that, you have to move forward and talk about the ways in which we can improve the situation. That is how we are going to enrich your answer, and that is how we are going to conclude your answer. The question is disaster of management than management of disaster. So you've talked about how it is a disaster of management. Now you have to talk about how to manage a disaster. That is going to be your way forward. And the conclusion, of course, is going to be futuristic. You're supposed to talk about NDMA guidelines, Sendai framework, etc., etc. All these things can be talked about. See, if every question can have Sendai framework, of course, if it is relevant, but in every disaster management question, it is quite relevant. You can always make Sendai framework relevant, because if you look at the provisions of Sendai framework, they are so broad that they can apply for everything. Like for example, in Constitution and Polity GS2, every question can have an Article 21 kind of angle. If your question is on right to privacy, you can link to the right to life and dignity of people. If the question is on transgender, you can also relate it to Article 21. If the question is on disabled, you can relate it to Article 21. If the question is on women, children, refugees, and so on, whoever it may be, you can relate it to Article 21, right? So that is the kind of significance Sendai framework has in GS3 disaster management. I want you to keep that in mind. So whenever you write your answer, you need to keep that in mind. These keywords, sector specific keywords, as in theme specific keywords. What do you write when there is a disaster management based question? What do you write when there is an environment based question? So these things you have to know. You have to make a short note of all of these things, and this is going to be your final revision notes before you go to your mains examination. So let's move forward and look at the sample answer. So here you go. Disaster management has been defined in this particular answer. It broadly encompasses management before, during, and after a disastrous event. Okay, so this is a good layman kind of introduction. This does the trick. Owing to its location, India is prone to a lot of disasters like earthquakes, cyclones, storm surges, so on. In addition to this, you could have added droughts and so on. Anyway, this is a good introduction. This is how you're supposed to write your introduction, but 5 lines of introduction is not advisable, especially for a 10 marker. Spend about 2 or 3 lines. That is more than sufficient. Moving forward, he's talking about disaster of management, a sad state of affairs. So the kind of response we have to disasters is poor. Like for example, evacuation of people was not done properly in 2018 tsunami, and even if it was done, it was not done in a timely manner. Okay, so it's not because people were not sympathetic to the people who have been affected by tsunami. It was because we simply were helpless. We did not have enough infrastructure, enough personnel, enough backup resources in hand in order to handle the situation, in order to evacuate these people. Even if these people were to be evacuated, where do you keep them? You need to have proper shelter houses and so on. You don't have that. We didn't have that at that point of time, not at least in a big scale. not at least on a big scale, right? So in such a situation, poor response to disasters has always been the case. Poor planning of water storage structures, water release timings have aggravated the flood related losses. What is trying to tell you, let's take a fair example. Like for example, if there is a dams usually from time to time, as in if it is a barrage, it from time to time releases water. Whenever there is an excess of water that is being stored in the reservoir, that water is going to be released, right? And if this is not done in a timely manner, this is going to create a situation of flood on the backstream, right? But at the same time, if you release all the water at once, it is going to create a situation of flood in the downstream. So you have to do it in an appropriate manner. But if we do not manage the situation well, it is definitely going to cause a problem. That is what he's trying to tell you. And inadequate implementations of safe building norms in earthquake prone regions, example Delhi. In addition to this, whenever you have infrastructure, you are supposed to check the infrastructure in a timely manner, right? So like for example, there are two ways in civil engineering. If any of you all are a civil engineer, there are two ways in which you can handle an infrastructure project. Like for example, once you have created maybe a dam, there are two ways in which you supervise it. One is demand based and the other is time based. Like for example, periodically every 1 month probably you're supposed to review this particular performance of a dam. Whether the dam is performing well or not, you do it in a periodic manner. But the other is demand based or need based. Whenever there is a complaint that the dam is not functioning well, whenever there is a complaint that there is a small crack in the dam, you go and supervise the situation. What kind of supervision you prefer? Time based supervision, periodic review. This is the kind of review that is important for an infrastructure project, because an infrastructure project, when it breaks, it is going to create an impact on a huge scale. And in order to avoid that, you are supposed to handle the situation better. You are supposed to periodically review the situation. So that is how you help the people. So no timely checks of infrastructure quality, like for example, the rail tracks are not maintained well, are not supervised well. This is going to lead to accidents. Dam qualities, if it is not handled well, if it is not periodically reviewed, it is going to lead to a situation of inundation. Black spots on roads, this is going to lead to a situation of deaths. I want you to write what black spots are. Write them down in the comment section. What is a black spot in a road? So let's move forward. So this is the second part of the answer. He is talking about proper disaster management procedure. Firstly, you have to go for a life cycle approach instead of going for a knee-jerk response. What I mean by that is, whenever there is a call of disaster, as in whenever the event of a disaster occurs, everybody in the media, everybody in the society, everybody in the government talks about it, talks about the different kind of measures that we should be taking and so on. But what about the measures that we have to take before the disaster? What about the planning measures that we have to take? What about the preparedness measures that we have to take? When you take these measures well, whenever the disaster occurs, the impact it is going to have on the society is going to be quite limited. You need to keep that in mind. So the kind of approach that you have to follow is what we call as the life cycle approach. This is the kind of schematic diagram that you can make. These kind of diagrams usually fetch marks in the examination, but of course you can't overdo any of these things. You have to do this only in a calculated manner. Now moving forward, you need to have disaster insurance. Whenever you have disaster, there is a loss of property, life and so on. In order to hedge all these things, some amount of insurance has to be there, because if a person, let's say he is in a coastal area, a tsunami has come and it has hit his house is totally gone. He doesn't know what to do. He has no livelihood. In such a situation, insurance can help. Insurance can create a situation of safety for the person. So disaster insurance is quite important, and this is in fact an important part of the preparedness, at least from a economic angle. Immediately when the disaster hits, the person at least has some kind of surety that he can come back, go back and pick up his life. He can go back and start living normally, at least in the next few months, if not few weeks. Right? And such a situation is made possible when you have disaster insurance. So mock drills have to be conducted from time to time. So when mock drills are conducted, they create a situation of disaster, as in they act like this disaster has happened, and they follow the necessary standard operating procedures. right? So these mock drills usually have a very good impact. These mock drills have been conducted in fact in relation to Delhi Metro project. Whenever the mock drill used to happen in such a way, like for example, suddenly there used to be an alarm and the alarm said that something went wrong in the metro project. So what kind of steps people take, what kind of steps the authorities at the metro rail project, authorities in the metro stations, people at the metro stations take, all these things have been done multiple times. So people have been acquainted, the authorities have been acquainted, and these mock drills have been a huge success in relation to Delhi Metro project. Moving forward, you have to build resilient infrastructure. The buildings have to be green, earthquake proof construction, and so on. You have to fulfill the Sendai framework and its predecessors, Yogo framework and the NDMA guidelines, and so on. You are simply talking about key points here. In addition to this, the community awareness that you create, that is really important, and in fact it goes a long way in handling the situation better. The kind of awareness which people have is in fact the biggest safety net, the biggest social safety net India can have. That is what this conclusion is trying to tell you. But this conclusion is quite small. He could have extended it. He could have talked about international collaboration and so on. Maybe those points could have helped his answer. But that should be the discussion for the day. Let's open up the question for tomorrow. So here's the question for tomorrow. The question for tomorrow is on tsunami. On December 2004, tsunami brought havoc on 14 countries including India. We are usually under the impression that that particular tsunami of 2004 has affected India mostly and some countries in Indonesia and so on. But in fact it has affected a lot of countries. It has affected Sri Lanka in a big way. Okay, it has affected a lot of countries in the Southeast Asia in a big way. So anyway, moving forward, discuss the factors responsible for the occurrence of tsunami. So what are the factors that are responsible, that are in the occurrence of the tsunami? What are the geographical factors? Are there any man-made factors? These things you can talk about, and then you talk about the impact of the tsunami on life and economy. And you have to talk about this in the light of the guidelines of NDMA. So think about these things, think about the introduction, body and conclusion of this particular question. We'll discuss the answer tomorrow. Thank you for your participation.